Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Splash City Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hartman. If you are a basketball fan in the state of Minnesota or Wisconsin, your heart rate might have finally come down after Tuesday's thriller in the barn between Minnesota and Wisconsin. Um, really excited for today's show because I brought on a former Badger player, Jared Berggren, Princeton, Minnesota native. He's working with Catalyst Training now to do basketball training, individual training, group training. And it was a really fun conversation. We talked a little bit about the game the other night that we both attended. We also talked about um, playing in Europe and differences between the game there and here and the youth level. And then we ended the conversation talking about training. And I think a lot of parents and coaches and players probably are interested in training and how much is too much and what kind of things should I be learning and what those types of questions would come up. And so I thought it was great to have Jared on and just kind of walk through his thought process and kind of the motto or themes that Catalyst provides. So really fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. The basketball this week's been outstanding. We had 3 buzzer beaters in college last night. Tuesday night was electric. And the Timberwolves got a win in Milwaukee. This weekend we got more action. We got the Timberwolves Friday night. Recording this on Thursday. Friday night, Wolves are in Houston. Saturday they're in San Antonio. So it's a big week. Every week from here on out through the NBA playoffs will probably feel that way. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the conversation with Jared. Really appreciate him coming on. And with that, let's get into it. All right, Tuesday night we had a thriller in the barn between Wisconsin and Minnesota, and what better time to bring on a former Badger player than now? I'm lucky enough to have Princeton, Minnesota native, all Big Ten player, Wisconsin, now a trainer with Catalyst Training, Jared Berggren. Welcome to the show.
Steve, thanks for having me, man. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. I know we'll talk a little bit about your playing days and we'll talk about your return to Minnesota after your playing days. But first, let's talk a little bit about what we saw at the barn. It was another great game in that rivalry. Wisconsin wins its 10th straight on a buzzer beater from John Blackwell. But I'm assuming you had some great games in the barn, great rivalry games with Minnesota. Did that bring up some of those memories?
Definitely did. Yeah, I mean, as a Minnesota native that jumped over to Wisconsin to play that game, especially coming back to Minnesota and playing in the barn is always a special one. So yeah, just being in that environment and seeing my Badgers get a win was fun, but definitely took me back to some memories of playing in that atmosphere and that environment. And we had some good battles with the Gophers back in my day for sure.
Yeah, I think there was maybe some overtime games or at least some close games. I think that was the Tubby Smith era for Minnesota, which was better than the last 5 or so years have been. Any specific memories or moments that stand out amongst those games?
Yeah, they definitely had some good teams then. I actually went back and looked at, just kind of to refresh my memory here, look back on, some of the results through my career. And my junior year, we ended up winning in overtime, at the barn. And I remember I think we were up, by a good amount late in the game, and we just went ice cold. Gophers came back, tied it up, and I think we were tied, and I had a chance to win. We ran a pick and pop ball screen with me and Jordan Taylor, another Minnesota guy that jumped over to the Badgers with me, and pick and pop threw it to me on I think it was the left wing right in front of our bench. End of the game, had a three, missed it. Would have been the biggest shot, as you can imagine, as a Minnesota native coming back. Like I said, would have been a fun one. Ended up missing it, but we got the win in overtime, so it ended well for us. But yeah, we had some battles with them. That one was one, and then I think my senior year, I want to say we lost there in another close one. I think we beat them at home. Trey Jackson, our point guard at the time, hit a kind of a last second shot, not quite a buzzer beater. I think there was like 2 seconds left maybe when he made it, but we had some close battles with them for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some great games throughout the years. Gophers kind of dominated during the Clem era. The Bo Ryan, Greg Gard era has been all Wisconsin, so it's always fun. It kind of ebbs and flows. I'm sure Gopher fans are excited to have Nico here, and maybe he can turn things around a little bit for them moving forward, and at least
I think
make
he's
it.
doing good stuff there. Yeah, I think they're going to be dangerous going forward. So we'll see. Hopefully my
Yeah,
boys keep it rolling here. They got 10 straight on them, so we
yeah.
won't dismiss that, but we'll see what happens here going forward.
Yeah, I always feel like it's not really a rivalry unless it's somewhat even. So, Duke Carolina, that's a rivalry. Everybody, every year that's back and forth. But anyway, yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun. It was a great game. Super super good environment. Braden Carrington came up huge and played some huge minutes for the Badgers as well, coming back to Minnesota.
Yeah, like you
Speaking
said,
of,
it's always special for the Minnesota guys to get that win. So I know he was feeling good when you come in there to your old team, especially that he was already there and come in and
yeah,
hit 7 threes. That's hard to beat.
yeah, yeah, for sure. He played phenomenal and has been playing great. I wanted to talk a little bit about, you mentioned your playing days. We talked a little bit about your time at Wisconsin, but one of the things that stood out to me was the fact that your first couple of years, you kind of sat and learned and grew as a player, learned the system, all that kind of stuff. Where in today's age, you don't see a lot of that anymore, right? Like if you go somewhere and you're like, hey, we're going to redshirt you, you're not going to play. A lot of guys are going to say,
Hmm.
well, I'll go mid-major route or I'll go wherever, where I can get on the
Hmm.
floor, develop while I play, and then move on up to the higher levels. Um, what is your take on that? Just as someone who kind of had that experience of learning for a couple years and then getting your moment as a junior senior to start, and obviously being all Big Ten, it worked out pretty well for you.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a different era now with the NIL stuff, the transfer portal stuff. It has its pros and cons. It gives players the flexibility to, go to a situation that they feel is best. And if they want to move on, they can move on, which, for fans isn't necessarily the most enjoyable experience. But for me, yeah, coming in, I was, a fairly highly ranked recruit, whatever that's worth. And they had actually had a couple of their big guys graduated right before I got there. So there was potential for me to come in and play right away. But as I got there, it was I probably wasn't ready, physically, mentally. We had a system that we really needed to, execute at a high level. There was obviously a high standard that Bo Ryan kept, and until you're ready to meet that standard, he's not going to put you on the floor. So come in, find out, I'm not quite ready, end up redshirting that first year. The next year, we still had John Lure and Keaton Nankerville were the two starting big guys that were ahead of me, and they were a year ahead of more experience. So freshman year I play a little bit, but they're getting the bulk of the minutes. Sophomore year, they're still there, getting the bulk of the minutes. I'm playing a little bit more, but not a ton. And then finally my fourth year in the program, my third year of eligibility, I move into that starter role and I, started every game for the rest of my career and played a lot and ended up, having a good career in the long run. But in today's atmosphere, today's environment, it definitely wouldn't have been, it's hard to say what would have happened with me. It's so normal now for players to transfer. If I went there and I redshirted, there would have been all kinds of other teams reaching out. It would have been, all these people like, well, what are you going to go there and sit for? Like, go there where you can play and, go get your NIL money somewhere else, maybe, or whatever it is. And, so it's hard to imagine, or it's hard to, to say what would have happened with me. I know I'm happy with the way things turned out, where, I think I learned a lot through those experiences. It's, there's toughness that evolves from, going through those trials and those hard times. And I think now players are maybe running from those things a little quicker than might be what's really best for them in the long run. So I'm happy with the way things turned out. Would I've loved to be able to make NIL money when I was playing? Yeah, of course. But with that, like I said, there's the downside of it, of players don't seem to have that, a 4 or 5 year home as commonly as what we did then. So I have lifelong relationships with coaches and players that I spent my time with there that, maybe I don't have if I were to jump ship and go somewhere else to just play immediately. So like I said, there's pros and cons to it. I'm happy with, how things turned out for me, but it's a different era now for sure.
Yeah, I mean, most people, whether it's at the high school level, college level, like you value those relationships with coaches and players and teammates, and like that's the stuff you remember. That's what makes it exciting and fun, 20 years after you're done playing.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I'm also as I've always been like a mid-major, right? Like I love March Madness for that feel. And I feel like that used to be their advantage, was the continuity. You'd have
Mhm.
guys that played together for 4 straight years, and that's what made them deadly against these the one and dones of Duke and Kentucky and North Carolina, right? Like you had that
Yeah.
advantage. I think you guys kind of probably had some of that advantage too, where you know, guys stuck around and played, and that was just continuity is just so important in basketball.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So it's hard. I mean, I've had conversations with coaches like the Wisconsin coaches or other programs, other coaches I know, and they're like, it's well, there's some parts of it make it easy where they're like, hey, it's the recruiting process is much more straightforward now of just like, hey, this is what we have for NIL, it's what we think we have for a role for you. Like, are you in? Boom. If not, all right, move on to the next guy. And it's that process can move quick, but with that, it's can be really challenging, right? Where it's you hit on the right transfers or whatever. It's like, all right, you could have a great year. Badgers have seen that. Tanjay last year was a great fit, comes in for 1 year
Hmm.
and just seems to be like he was like a perfect Badger, like worked out really well. We've had other guys that have come in that maybe haven't fit quite as well, and there's challenges with that. Like you see a guy on tape, you see what they did at their previous school, and you're like, hey, this could be great, and then until you get to know them, you don't really know what you're in for. So it's that's where it's hard to find that consistency where the Badgers, that's kind of been their bread and butter there for since Bo Ryan was in charge and through Coach Guard. They had, besides a couple years that were a couple blips here, but they had the really consistent steady process here, and now it's like, well, you got a whole new group every year, so to find that stability year after year is, it's really going to be a testament to how these coaches are able to implement their systems quickly and how they're able to evaluate and bring in the right guys in a totally different environment and totally different landscape here. So it's interesting to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't envy these coaches. There's a lot going on right now. I mean, you're recruiting your current players, you're recruiting new players. It's wild.
Yeah, it's
Um,
tough for sure.
moving, let's talk a little bit about your professional career. You played overseas for 6 years in some top leagues in Europe, Japan. Looking back on that time, or thinking about that, how was that transition for you as a player, and kind of maybe even as like a person, and being in a foreign country and not always, just like what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so it's funny you bring that up. So I was actually just telling a kid who's kind of fresh out of college who's starting to work with me doing some training stuff, and I was telling him about my whole process. So, I get out of college and sign with an agent, and a couple months later I'm moving to Belgium and doing all this, and dealing with, I got injured over there, and I had some different things with teams getting new ownership and changing players, and I'm not sure if I'm going to stay there or move to a new team and all this stuff. And he's like, man, you had a crazy life. Like, that's such a crazy experience. He's like, I can't imagine going through that. Like, I was a couple years older than he is now. And I'm looking at him like, this is a kid. You know what I mean? He's like, and then I think back on my time of dealing with all that stuff. And I was like, that really was a wild experience of, going to a foreign country and figuring out, how to live in a totally different culture, and not always speaking the same language as your coaches, or at least there's a language barrier of, they don't they might speak English, but it's broken, it's different, right? So it's trying to figure out that stuff, and the style of play is different, and the emphasis on rules are different, and all of that. So it's there's a lot of things to adjust to. I was lucky to go to some good spots in Belgium my first couple years, Italy for 2 years after that, and then Japan for a year, in Switzerland. So I kind of bounced all over the place, but overall, some really good experience, some really fun experiences, but definitely challenging things, and things that made me grow as a player and as a person, for sure.
You mentioned like style of play being a little different. Steve Nash had a quote recently about the American system of sports, youth sports specifically, compared to Europe. The premise being that in Europe they do a lot more practice, fewer games, so their skill development is different
Mhm.
versus America, where it's more, there's a lot of financial components to it. You're paying for tournaments and time and all this stuff. Just curious what your thought is about that, specifically the training, the youth model, the club model in Europe versus how American youth sports operate.
I think that's one of the big parts there, is the difference in games versus practice, where you look at like middle school teams now, everyone plays the travel basketball. They usually practice like twice a week, and then they go to a tournament on the weekends that they're going to play 3 to 5 games or whatever it is on the weekend. And there it's completely flipped, where these teams are going to practice 5 or 6 times a week, and then play, probably one game on the weekend or whatever it is. So the development there is totally different. The the way things are structured in terms of, like you said, it's, there's it's kind of the club model where you get involved with a specific club, local to that city, usually when you're pretty young, and you just kind of come up through the ranks of those programs. So you might start when you're, I don't know, 10, 12 years old even, and then as you grow, the better players move up. And then, like, when I was playing there, a lot of times we would have some, 16, 17, 18-year olds that play on the junior teams, and then they would come practice with us. Some of them would, be on the bench and get into the games if it was a blowout, or some of them would even be into our lineup and rotation if they were, really talented young players. So, and here it's more kind of individual based. It's pay for play. It's, you get into this AAU team, you pay all this money for the tournaments and travel and all this stuff, and players are flying all over the country for, exposure in these tournaments. And it's a lot of it is, you know, predicated on people at the top of these making money. And I don't think it's necessarily predicated on providing the best growth opportunities for players. And there's some programs that do a great job of it, some that, probably sell things to kids that maybe don't need to be sold. So it's yeah, America, has kind of been the top of the basketball world for so long, because we're so big. We have so many athletes, so much talent, so much money that goes into it. And I think that gap is kind of closing now as these European teams are coming up in France or in Serbia or these different places, that it's a totally different model, and you see it, creeping up to the top levels of, so it kind of begs the question of, are we doing things the best way, or, some of these other models different? And I don't know how you would go about implementing changes there, but it's interesting to see the different philosophies of how it happens, and, what the end result is. But it's there's definitely strong differences between our model and the European model in general.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier, when off camera, we were talking about AAU and how you said you didn't start playing AAU till your junior year. Was that like a conscious decision that you and your family made about, like, I want to work on my game, but then at junior year I'll be ready and then I do the more exposure stuff? Or was it just like, yeah, I didn't even think
No,
about it until my
yeah,
junior year?
I wish I could say it was like a conscious thing of like, hey, this is the model, this is the strategy here. It was just, I was growing up in Princeton first. It was, I graduated in 2008, so it was a different, different landscape then. It was, AU was around, but it wasn't nearly what it is now. Now it's everybody plays AU. There's a million teams, which is good to provide, opportunities for kids. Where back then it was, if you weren't one of the top one or two players on your high school team, you probably weren't going to play AU, because there wasn't, that many options. So no, I was just growing up in Princeton, just playing there, didn't know anything about anything. And then we had a senior that was being recruited by some, so like D2 schools, when I was a sophomore. And then they started seeing me, and they're like, hey, who's he playing AU for? Like, this kid could be pretty good. And I was like, I didn't even think about playing AU. They kind of, some coaches recommended I get in with Howard Pulley. I went to their tryouts after the season. They actually stuck me on their top 17 team, as a 16-year-old, and I started playing with them. And I went from playing in Princeton in the old Mississippi 8 to, about a month or two later, I'm playing against Blake Griffin and Kemba Walker and some future NBA All Stars, in these tournaments all over the country. And a couple of short months after that, it was kind of this whirlwind experience of getting recruited by a bunch of different schools. And already by, around like December, January of my junior year, I already committed to Wisconsin. So it was a really fast process for me. But no, it wasn't some master plan of like, let's stay out of this and work on my game. It was just, honestly, just being really naive to what was out there, and then getting exposed to it and figuring it out, and, being thrown into the fire. And then, yeah, like I said, committing pretty quick to Wisconsin. So it was definitely a different process the way I went through it compared to how kids are going through that all today.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip. I mean, it worked out well for you. Everything was fine. It's not like missing out on some AAU in ninth grade, eighth grade hurt anything. I mean, I think that's kind of the I don't know if there's a lesson here, but just
Yeah.
more of a thought around like it's not always just about playing
Kids
as much games as you
kids
can
get
in
too
spring.
caught up in it. Parents get too caught up in it. I've had parents that
Yeah,
are like, well,
yeah,
what do we
true.
do? Do we play AU? I'm like, dude, what do you want to do? Like, your kid's in sixth grade. Like, relax. If he's gonna be good, he's gonna be good.
Right.
If he's not gonna be good, like, what do you want to do right now? Like, if you're really gonna be a college prospect, like, that's, the cream rises to the top at some point. So he'll have his opportunities. He'll be able to get
Yeah.
on the good teams and get in front of coaches that he needs to at the right time. But it's different now too, that I've had this conversation many times. College coaches they're hardly recruiting high school kids at this. The top teams are, unless you're a
Yeah.
McDonald's All-American or a 4 or 5 star kid, like, they're probably going to get a kid out of the portal because they're experienced already. So and that all trickles down where it's at every level. They're recruiting, a little bit less than what they've done in the past. So there's no right or wrong way. Get on teams, play AU, great, train, work on your game, get in the weight room, play other sports. There's a lot of things you can do to develop. So I think that's a underlying message that I tell parents and players all the time is like, do what you want to do, enjoy it, work hard, try to get better, but there's not one script that you need to follow just because someone else did it.
Said. Well said. Let's transition now. I want to wrap with just talking about what you're doing today. Catalyst training, basketballcatalyst.com, I believe is the
Mhm.
website. Um, so after your playing days were over, come back to the States. Did you know you wanted to get into training? Like how did this career start for you?
So it all kind of started. So I started training with Reed Ossie, who founded Catalyst. I had met Reed initially when I was in college. He came out to Wisconsin and just helped run, our huge summer camps out there. And honestly, I don't really remember meeting him then, but we were like Facebook friends. And then I went overseas after I think maybe my second summer that I was home after being overseas. I was like, all right, I need to get with a trainer. I'd kind of been working out on my own, maybe getting in the gym with like my old high school coach, things like that. But I saw Reed posting some stuff online about coming back to Minnesota and doing some camps and training. He looked like he had some interesting stuff. So I sent him a message. I was like, hey, I'm looking for someone to train with. And then I started getting in the gym with him. He had a bunch of the pro guys at the time, Cole Aldrich, who played at Kansas, played in the NBA, played for the Wolves for a while. Started working out with Cole, with Reed as the trainer for a couple summers. Became good friends with Reed, and then as time went on, playing overseas, I started having kids. Body started breaking down a little bit. I was like, I don't know how much longer I can keep, going through the grind overseas. And I started helping out Reed with some of the training stuff where I'd work out with them, and then I'd stay after and, help run some younger kid sessions. Once I got done playing in 2019, Reed kind of helped get me connected with a couple schools in the area. I found a gym that I do most of my training out of, and yeah, just kind of started growing the business from there. And so yeah, it's almost coming up on 7 years now that I've been training, and a lot of it came from my relationship with Reed and him kind of giving me the platform with Catalyst to be able to grow this and get connected with a lot of schools and a lot of players in the area. And it's been a lot of fun making this transition, staying around the game and being able to be home, not chasing, jobs all over the place like a college coach needs to do, or moving all over the world like I had to do as a player. So being able to be home and stay around the game has been a lot of fun to make this next step in my career with basketball here.
Awesome. So for those people who don't really know or haven't explored individual or group training, can you kind of give an overview of Catalyst's kind of motto or the emphasis that you guys put on your training?
Yeah, so we do a lot of different things. Anywhere this time of year, I do a lot of stuff working with different like travel associations. So I partner with a lot of different schools, and I'll come in and I'll do either team workouts, working with one or two teams at a time, working with kind of whole programs where I might have just like a skill night that we come in and we'll work with a bunch of different teams at once, and we'll take them through some skill stuff. And then I'd do anything from individual workouts, a lot of small group stuff, and a lot of team training programs. I have some camps coming up that I'll do. I'll do a camp on like MLK Day and President's Day and different things like that. I'll do little 1 day clinics and things. But in terms of what we do, a lot of our focus is on footwork, right? Where footwork, in my opinion, is going to be an essential skill, whether you're, a point guard or a center or anything in between. We focus a lot on footwork, a lot on ball handling, finishing around the rim. And we kind of work our way out to, different perimeter shooting things, different, change of direction moves, or different ways to stop, different ways to create space, different ways to handle ball pressure, and try to tie those things into, how it can apply to your game. What little details can we do? Can we get you moving smoother with the ball? Can we get better control of your feet and of the basketball? And as we do those things, we build that coordination. We open up different options for your game, get into different live situations, whether it's, ball screen reads, or, when to cut, when to space, different things like that, that in group things, or team things, trying to tie the individual skills into how can we actually implement that. And I think that's, there's different things. We talked about the style between, American basketball, European basketball. There, it's a lot of movement. It's a lot of team-based things. America in general, you see more kind of one-on-one stuff, more individual skill, isolation basketball, things like that. So I think both have their benefits. Not that we're training kids to be, the next James Harden here, but there's things you can take away from, the extreme level of individual skill that they have. But we always try to pick ways to, have players implement that into team systems and play good quality basketball, and not just, dribble the ball to death here. So there's a lot of different things we do that it's fun being able to help players grow, and having different perspectives of where I've played and trained and learned a lot about the game, and try to pass that on to the next generation of players is a rewarding experience for sure.
I love that you led with footwork. Just as, again, more of an older guy, a traditional basketball person. I love that, because I think that's such an important part of the game that is probably not utilized as well as it could be. Um,
I'm big on that. I mean, that's going back to Wisconsin. We repped out, jump stops and pump fakes and pivots probably more than anyone in the country. So that's still in my blood. We worked on that last night with some travel teams that I was working on. We're getting to jump stops, working on pump fakes, being strong on our pivots. And I think that's stuff that, yeah, it makes a big difference when you can do those little things. And yeah, we're always gonna, kind of preach those fundamentals too.
yeah. So one last question related to training, and then I'll let you plug Catalyst. But what's the one thing, or there's maybe more than one, but what's the one of the common things you see kids coming into that they're lacking? Like, just thinking about, like, can they be more prepared when they first get introduced to you guys and your staff? But like, where do you see the biggest gaps right now with youth players?
I think there's a couple things. So one, I would say players tend to do what they're comfortable with, right? So that's where, with this model we have now of kids play so many games, which I think a lot of times parents and players think like, oh, well, we got to play more to get better. And that's part of it. But when you play, you're generally going to do what you're best at, because you want to win, right? Which is natural. The problem with that is you get stuck into, you do these things really well, and you don't explore other options. So simple examples of that, or micro details of that, is like the way we stop, like as a right-handed player, or how we set our feet to shoot. A lot of players will step in left, right. And when
Hmm.
we go the other way, instead of being able to go right, left, they'll go right, left, right again, because they're used to that left, right finish. So there's little things like that. It's like, hey, you're going to be a little less efficient with that, because you haven't worked on this, or you try to finish with your right hand all the time, and your left hand is weak, right? So it's like, we got to attack those weaknesses and try to grow and expand your game that way. And like I said, when you play, you're going to tend to do those things that you're already best at. So that's a big thing for me, is trying to find weaknesses in players' games and say, hey, it's not that what you're doing is bad, but if it's the only thing you can do, you're going to be limited. Let's try to expand our game and see where we can grow. The other piece is, I think, the training industry has grown so much. Like, trainers, it wasn't a business when I was coming through high school. Now everyone has a trainer. Everyone does their individual skill sessions.
Hmm.
But I think kind of where the magic kind of happens here is when you can get players to actually implement things and know when and why to use things, not just let's dribble around a cone and do this, which I do that. I'm not anti-cone, right? There's some people are like, oh, you got to do everything live. I do a lot of live stuff. I do a lot of skill stuff, right? That's 1 on 0. But it's figuring out when and why to use something, not to just do moves in a vacuum, right? But understand like why would we do this thing? What's the advantage of doing this thing versus that thing? And then getting players to understand, how it can be effective in actual application, and then ultimately, yeah, trying to get them better in a game, which is what ultimately matters. So I think a lot of people can, you can teach moves, you can teach them how to dribble between their legs, whatever it is, but there's finer details of those things of like, well, what type of between the legs dribble are we going to do? What's the angle on this? What kind of space are we trying to create or trying to attack? And then, like I said, figuring out when to use these things versus when to, hey, if you're open, let's just go take the easy one. We don't need to make a million dribble moves if we have an easy cut to the rim and a finish off 2 feet, right? So that's the finding the balance here too of overloading skill, challenging them with difficult things versus, let's just play simple when we can too. So it's, there's a lot that goes into it. There's nuance between all these things, and I think that's kind of what separates average trainers from good trainers. And not trying to say I have all the answers on this, but those are things that I'm always trying to balance and find the right path for.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a couple other things that stand out to me. I hear the word angles, and I just love it because I think basketball is such a game of angles that's lost
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. I see a lot of kids like floating to baselines instead of like keeping an angle to score at the rim and things like that. Just small
Yeah.
things, but it's so important. So,
Yeah.
um, if
100%.
if somebody wants to sign up, whether it's an individual or a group, with you guys, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, just check out our website. So it's basketballcatalyst.com, or if you just Google Catalyst Training, you'll find our website there. So you'll see different options on there. Right now, like I said, during the season, I do a lot of stuff that I partner with, like travel programs and things like that. So I don't have a ton of stuff available for like my private stuff and small group stuff. There's a little bit on there, but as we get out of the season, there'll be much more available. But yeah, feel free to reach out there. We have contact info on there with my email address, things like that, or social media. I'm active there too. I post a lot of stuff. So it's my accounts on Twitter or X now or Instagram. It's J Berggren 40. So I'm posting stuff on there of drill ideas and move breakdowns and different kind of conceptual things about how players develop and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, those are free resources there. We have online programs as well for coaches and players to do online workouts, or coaches have kind of drill ideas and progression based things of how you can implement some of this stuff with your team. So we have a lot of stuff available. So yeah, check that out on the website, or send me a message to see what you guys can do. I have camps coming up. Like I said, I'll have individual stuff, small group stuff available pretty much year round. So if anyone's interested, yeah, we'd love to get you guys in the gym.
Awesome. Yeah, Jared Reed, the whole organization does a great job. The social media stuff's great, but there's nothing like getting in the gym, working. So definitely
Absolutely.
recommend everybody reach out, check out basketballcatalyst.com. Jared, I feel like we could talk for hours. I'd love to revisit some late 2000s, early 2010s basketball, but we'll have to save that for another time. Appreciate coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we could talk hoops all day, but we'll yeah, maybe we'll have to run it back another time here.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back. Thanks again for coming on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Good talking to you.
All right, so that's the show today. I want to thank Jared Berggren again from Catalyst Training for coming on. Great insight, great thoughts. The conversation was super fun. We could have went on for hours. Um, if you do want to follow the program, you can follow me, Splash City Basketball, on Instagram. We're also on Facebook. Subscribe on YouTube. Leave a comment, leave a review. Love to hear what you're thinking. Love to know if there's a player out there or a team out there you want to talk about more, or if you want to get into the nitty gritty. Hoping we can break down more specifics on like defensive training, defensive thought, strategies, and things like that with the next guest that I can bring on. Also hoping to bring Andrew Dukowitz back from zone coverage to talk about Timberwolves and kind of like the mid-year break. So yeah, just appreciate y'all listening. I hope you enjoyed today's program. And as always, take care, be kind, and be nice to each other. This has been the Splash City Basketball Podcast.
Back in that bag.